Have you ever heard of a place so terrifying that even horror movies seem pale in comparison? This is a true story of Cannibal Island, a dark chapter in history that took place in Russia about 90 years ago. In 1933, during the brutal rule of Joseph Stalin in the Soviet Union, an experiment was conducted that turned humans into monsters. An island became a living nightmare, where people were forced to eat each other just to survive. But how did this horror begin? And why did it happen? To understand this, we need to look at the Soviet Union in the 1930s. At that time, Stalin wanted complete control over the country. He saw anyone who did not agree with him as an enemy. To maintain his power, he began to arrest thousands of people, labeling them as criminals, political opponents, or simply unwanted. These included beggars, homeless people, farmers who refused to give up their land, and anyone suspected of opposing his rule. Stalin came up with a cruel plan to get rid of these people. He decided to send them to remote parts of Siberia, far away from civilization, where they would be left to die. His idea was to turn these barren lands into productive farms, thinking that the prisoners would work to survive. But this was just an excuse. In reality, he was sending them to a place where survival was nearly impossible. One of these places was Nazino Island, a small, cold, and empty island in the middle of the Ob River in Siberia. In May 1933, about 6,700 prisoners were crammed into wooden boats and sent to this island. Their journey was terrible. They were given only a few slices of bread, and the conditions were so harsh that 27 people died before they even reached the island. When the prisoners finally arrived, they were shocked by what they saw. There was nothing on the island. No shelter, no food, no tools, and no way to escape. All they found was mud, cold water, and a harsh wind that cut through their bones. There was no way to build fires to keep warm, and the freezing temperatures were deadly. On the first night alone, around 300 people died from cold and hunger. The only food provided was 20 tons of raw flour, but there was no way to cook it. When the guards tried to distribute the flour, chaos broke out. People were crazed with hunger, attacked each other. Fights erupted, and the guards were overwhelmed. They quickly retreated to their boats, leaving the prisoners behind without any food or help. Desperation turned to madness. People tried to mix the flour with the cold river water, but this only made them sick. As the days passed, more and more prisoners died of disease, hunger, and cold. The island became a place of horror, filled with cries of pain and suffering. The situation got worse when gangs began to form. The stronger prisoners grouped together to steal food from the weaker ones. Violence became a way of survival. The guards, who were supposed to maintain order, turned cruel. They began to abuse their power, exploiting women and taking whatever valuables the prisoners had, even pulling out gold teeth from the dead. As the hunger grew unbearable, people did the unthinkable. They began to eat the dead. At first, they only ate those who had died from cold or disease, but soon it became much worse. Some prisoners were killed just for their flesh. It was the most horrifying form of survival, and this is how Nazino Island became known as Cannibal Island. A witness recalled seeing prisoners tied to trees, their bodies cut into pieces while they were still alive. The gangs would hunt the weakest prisoners, kill them, and then eat them. It was not just about hunger anymore. It became a brutal fight for survival where humanity was lost. Even women and children were not spared. Many women were taken by the gangs and were abused in exchange for food. Some tried to form alliances with the gang leaders for protection, but it was never enough. No one was safe on Cannibal Island. Amidst all this horror, some prisoners tried to escape. They built makeshift rafts from wood and clothing, attempting to cross the freezing river. But the water was icy cold, and the currents were strong. Most of the rafts were swept away, and many prisoners drowned. Those who managed to reach the other side found themselves in the harsh forests of Siberia, where wild animals, cold, and starvation awaited them. Only a handful survived. This nightmare continued for 13 weeks. Out of the 6,700 people sent to the island, over 4,000 died from hunger, violence, and disease. About 2,800 survived, but most of them were so weak and ill that they did not live long after being rescued. Only about 200 prisoners were found to be in relatively good health. When the Soviet government realized that nothing positive would come from this cruel experiment, They ordered the remaining survivors to be rescued. But by then, the island had become a graveyard. Bodies were scattered everywhere, and the survivors were more like ghosts than humans. To hide this tragedy, Stalin and his officials covered up the incident. All reports were classified, and no one was allowed to speak about Cannibal Island. It wasn't until 50 years later, when the Soviet Union collapsed, that documents about this horror were discovered. The world finally learned about the cruelty that had taken place on Nazino Island. Historians still debate why this happened. Some say it was an experiment by Stalin to see how much people could suffer before losing their humanity. Others believe it was a cruel way to get rid of those he saw as useless or dangerous to rule. Whatever the reason, Cannibal Island remains one of the darkest and most horrifying events in human history. It shows how power and cruelty can turn people into monsters. So, what would you have done in such a situation? Could you have survived on an island with no food, no shelter, and no hope? Would hunger have turned you into a beast? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story shocked you and you learned something new today, please like and share this video. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell for more stories from history's darkest corners. Until next time, stay safe and take care.